pharmacies as you come in to admit your addiction.
Oh,
And
it's going a bit far, I think. That, you know, I'm troubled by no smoking in prison and you know, mental health patients not being able to smoke if they want to. I mean, the whole thing is on the run. But, you know, there are certainly a lot of other harmful things that we do to ourselves and others that don't have nearly this much pressure. So.
Do you agree, Dwayne? I mean, do you fully understand why smoking is viewed so darkly?
I'm biased. I don't like smoking at all for lots of reasons. Yeah, so I can see why, and I think there was an unevenness. I wish we'd be as, you know, a little bit. We're kind of lax. For example, the alcohol reform bill, we were kind of mediocre, and we were so strong on this one. And I just really appreciated the Nigel Latter show on that you can get on demand. You know, talking about the alcohol. So there is an unevenness how we're dealing with these various social ills. But one point I read there, and I thought it was good. It's about helping those who are trying to get off and actually stopping those who from getting on. If that's the driver, I think, oh, okay, I can see some sense in that. You know, you're sort of trying to, you know, for me, trying to eat less, and so there's foods in front of me, mate, my salivation response is immense. So I can see where they're coming from in terms of getting it away from people who are trying to do something different.
It seems that stern solutions may become vogue. The effectiveness of 25 commercial weight loss programs has been assessed at La Trobe University. We know this already mostly. Dropout rates are higher. For those who do stay the course with commercial weight loss, many lose less than 5% of their starting body weight. So the recommendation from these academics is that to really change obesity rates, there needs to be coordination between transport, health, environment and food sectors and a complete transformation of our lifestyles. So, a society that'll manage your life, that'll nudge you away from fast food, make you walk and cycle and catch the bus. Is this what you want?
I can barely get past Dunkin' Donuts on the way through the Auckland, you know, check-in. So I almost always get those donuts. So I don't know, I kind of like it, but then I'm going, man, that doesn't really help where I'm trying to go.
I mean, I also think nagging and, I mean, there's a lot of over-dramatisation of, you know, bad things and, you know, the evils of ever having a treat in your lunchbox and so on. But really all the new science about the brain and how habits are formed and that sort of thing, I think there's much more helpful information there than having people sort of, you know, it's like having a sheepdog sort of herding you and, you know, constantly herding you away from things and biting you on the bum if you go near a Dunkin' Donut.
It is a bit like that. Hey, lovely to have both of you on the panel today. Thank you so much. Jane Clifton has been with Dwayne Major. Always a pleasure with both of you. I hope you both have a lovely long weekend too.
Thank you, you too.
Will do. Likewise.
I hope your knighthood's in the post, Jim.
Oh, and of course the knighthoods. Yes.
Totally.
Eternal hope, Jane.
Arise, Sir James.
Thank you very much. It's got a ring to it. And that applies to all of you, to those of you who don't have to work this weekend. Have a lovely time. Checkpoint with John Campbell coming up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Donald Trump says America first, but does pulling out of the Paris Accord achieve that? What happened, why it happened, and what next? Plus reaction from far and wide. 34 dead in the casino in Manila. Medicinal cannabis in the government's announcement. Missing Christchurch man Michael McGrath. No sign, no word. Why earning a living wage will change an Auckland council worker's life. The National Cat Show in Christchurch. We send a dog lover, and we ask the Mayor of Whangarei to leave her office and find us a Lion supporter out on the street, and she does exactly that. It's Friday night, you're with Checkpoint. Thank you for being with us. We will be back after the Pips and Katrina with the news.
RNZ News at 5. Talofa lava, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. At least 34 bodies have been found in a casino complex in the Philippine capital, Manila, hours after a gunman opened fire with an assault rifle and set gaming tables on fire. The police say most of the victims died from suffocation as they tried to flee the choking smoke which filled the Resorts World Manila building. The gunman killed himself as the police stormed the complex. Local reporter Rafi Santos from ABS CBN has the latest.
The police are conducting follow-up operations on the suspect. They have identified the suspect but have yet to divulge his name and his details. What we do now for certain is that he was acting alone during the incident, which has killed so far, according to the Bureau of Fire Protection, they have found 34 bodies inside the Resorts World Casino on the second and the third floor of that particular building.
Rafi Santos from ABS-CBN in Manila. The brother of a missing Christchurch builder who hasn't been seen in nearly 2 weeks has made a desperate plea for information. Michael McGrath was last seen at his Hallswell home on Sunday the 21st of May. The police raided 2 houses earlier this week as part of the investigation into the 49-year-old's disappearance. His brother Simon McGrath said at the Christchurch Central Police Station a short while ago that Michael's disappearance is completely out of character.
Michael lived alone. He enjoyed his work as a builder. His family and friends are desperate to get him home, and we're making this plea for any sightings or activity. Someone could have some sort of information which will help police. It might appear trivial, but it may be the piece of the puzzle we need to solve this mystery.
Simon McGrath. The police say they'll search around Sabus Road and Hallswell tomorrow for evidence that could help them find Michael McGrath. The American President Donald Trump has drawn widespread national and international condemnation after announcing plans to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The United States is the world's second largest polluter, but Mr. Trump says the accord, which aims to curb global warming, is unfair and will cost millions of American jobs. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports.
The White House Rose Garden was the most fragrant of settings for what environmentalists see as a toxic presidential decision, one that directly affects ecosystems all over the planet, from Donald Trump's back lawn to the mightiest of oceans and ice sheets. He slammed this global agreement, a legacy of his predecessor Barack Obama that took years to negotiate, claiming it gave China and other countries an unfair competitive advantage and penalised American workers. And though he said he wanted to negotiate a better deal for America, he didn't seem worried if the rest of the world doesn't agree to one. From its first word to its last, this was an America First address.
Nick Bryant reporting from Washington. A woman who's lobbied for medicinal cannabis since the death of her son hopes a law change will keep others from suffering the same fate. The government is making it easier for doctors to prescribe a form of medicinal cannabis by lifting restrictions on cannabidiol, also known as CBD. Rose Renton's son Alex died of severe epilepsy in 2015. He was the first New Zealander to be granted an exemption to use medicinal cannabis a month beforehand. Ms. Renton says today's announcement is good, but should have come earlier.
It should have been there. It should never have been removed from the medicine cabinet. It should have been a first-line treatment, not a last-line treatment. It's non-toxic. I know there were a lot of toxic drugs in his system. 43 drugs went through his system while he was in hospital, and that induced coma. And, yeah, the outcome could have been very different.
Rose Renton says she won't stop fighting till medicinal cannabis is available across the board. A jury has found a Hastings doctor guilty of stupefying and indecently assaulting male patients. In the Napier District Court today, David Kang Kwat Lim was convicted of 5 charges of indecent assault against 3 of the 4 men and 5 of disabling through sedation. Michael Kropp reports.
During the trial, the prosecution argued Lim used the sedative midazolam, intending to take advantage of the men. However, Lim's lawyer, Harry Walkins QC, said the drug was known to cause hallucinations, and he argued in this case the patients believed their hallucinations were real. Mr. Walkins says his client is disappointed at the verdict but respects the jury's decision nonetheless. Mr. Walkins says it's too soon to say whether his client will appeal against the verdicts. He says it's likely the health practitioners' disciplinary tribunal will now consider the disciplinary consequences of the convictions. Call Michael Kropp there now.
It's 5:05. The Black Caps may hold the Chapel Hadley Trophy, the supremacy of trans-Tasman cricket, but Australia loom as a tough start for New Zealand in the Champions Trophy one-day competition in Birmingham tonight. Leading batsmen Steve Smith and David Warner didn't play when Australia relinquished the Chapel Hadley Trophy earlier this year, and Black Cap skipper Kane Williamson knows they'll be a much more formidable proposition side at Edgbaston.
He's a world-class player, along with Davey Warner, who wasn't involved. But anytime you play Australia, whatever team they put out, they're very tough to beat. I know we're usually involved in series and you kind of get into the games and hopefully improve throughout, but it's a one-off fixture in tournament cricket, and it's important that we start strong.
Kane Williamson, the match starts at 9:30 tonight. New Zealand's Lydia Ko will relinquish her world #1 ranking on Monday, ending an 84-week reign at the top of women's golf. Ko's not playing in this week's LPGA Classic in New Jersey, which means she's certain to be overtaken by either Thailand's Arya Jutanagan or South Korea's So-yeon Ryu. With Jutanagan also skipping the event, Ryu can grab the top ranking if she wins in New Jersey, finishing in a 2- or 3-way tie for second or comes outright third. Otherwise, Jutanagan will be #1. And the Golden State Warriors have comfortably won the opening game of the NBA basketball finals, beating defending champions the Cleveland Cavaliers 113-91. That's the news.
On Country Life this week.
I will be the only farmer in this country that has takahe drinking out of the same trough as cattle or my horses.
And he's one of the few farmers producing his own marketing material.
This is work with a Chinese client to promote prime Angus chilled beef into the Chinese market. I've provided some video footage of cattle just to demonstrate the free range, natural way that we operate.
Check it out. Country Life this Friday evening at 9 and Saturday morning at 7, RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Periods of rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms north of Auckland City, clearing tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Mainly fine, isolated showers about northern Waikato and western Bay of Plenty today and near the eastern ranges tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waitarapa, cloudy, a few showers becoming more frequent about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine weather. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy today with isolated showers near the coast, becoming fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog, clearing tomorrow morning, a southerly change tomorrow afternoon or evening with showers. Fiordland, fine today but low cloud about the lakes, a period of rain tomorrow afternoon, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Katrina.
Yes.
Malele soifua, everyone. Welcome to Checkpoint. We begin tonight with Donald Trump and those 3 words, we are getting out. Actually, he said we're getting out because we are his 4 words. He'd campaign on exactly that. But as global leaders implored him not to pull out, there had been some hope that the US president would keep America in the Paris Climate Accord. That agreement, signed by up to almost 200 countries, is considered the world's best chance of curbing global warming. Donald Trump says withdrawing from it will save American jobs and put America first. But critics say it will not only put America last, but the whole planet last too. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
The White House Rose Garden, the most fragrant of settings for what environmentalists will see as a toxic presidential decision. One that directly affects ecosystems all over the planet, from Donald Trump's back lawn to the mightiest of oceans and ice sheets.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
He slammed this global agreement, a legacy of his predecessor Barack Obama, claiming it gave China and other countries an unfair competitive advantage and penalised American workers.
Thank you.
From its first word to its last, this was an America First address.
This agreement is less about the climate and more about other countries gaining a financial advantage over the United States. At what point does America get demeaned? At what point do they start laughing at us as a country? We want fair treatment for its citizens, and we want fair treatment for our taxpayers. We don't want other leaders and other countries laughing at us anymore, and they won't be. They won't be. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
For Donald Trump, it's all about the art of the deal. And he said he wants to negotiate a better one for America. But he didn't seem that worried if the rest of the world doesn't agree to one.
In negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine.
Climate change is an American problem too. Just visit Florida, a picturesque front line in the fight against global warming. Rising sea levels and recurring flooding risks turning Miami Beach into a modern-day Atlantis, a city submerged by water. Even on sunny days, it can get inundated because seasonal king tides bring the ocean to people's doorsteps. And further up the coast is Mar-a-Lago, the president's luxury estate. It's estimated that over the coming decades, a quarter of it could be underwater.
Miami Beach is going to disappear.
No wonder local residents such as Dan Kipnis are alarmed.
Our so-called president thinks it's a hoax. It's a Chinese hoax. I mean, I can't believe it. I live right in the middle of climate change every day. We are so affected here. How dare the leader of this great country say it doesn't exist?
Travel to the Midwest coal and rust belt and you get a very different view. Amongst many of Donald Trump's working-class supporters, the Paris Agreement is seen as a killer of American jobs. But head further west to California, a state that's long set the pace on green issues in America, and you'll find a Democratic governor who's promised to conduct his own climate change negotiations with President Xi of China.
President Trump has gone AWOL, absent without leave, and now it's up to Xi, and California will work with him and work with other countries to do everything we can to offset the negative pathway chosen by President Trump.
This is a decision of enormous planetary and geopolitical significance. Critics will claim America has abdicated leadership on arguably the world's biggest problem. That America first means America alone.
That's the BBC's Nick Bryant. Interestingly, 61 US mayors, including those from Los Angeles, New York, Boston and, pointedly, Pittsburgh, have signed an open letter promising they will continue to try to meet commitments made under the accord. The criticism has been vehement from some corners, of course, including from within the US political establishment. David Gergen, a presidential advisor for Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, spoke for many when he answered a question from CNN's Aaron Burnett.
Is this an unprecedented decision?
Yes, and I'm sorry to say this, but Aaron, listen, some 70 years ago, the United States entered an international agreement called the Marshall Plan when we came to the aid of Europe, and it was one of the noblest acts in human history. Today, we've walked away from the rest of the world, and it's one of the most shameful acts in our history. I think it will be widely seen around the world as a terrible, terrible setback for the planet. We represent as a country 4% of the world's population, but we represent about a third of all the excess carbon dioxide that's now warming the planet. We're the largest contributor to carbon dioxide in the world. And for us to walk away as this carbon dioxide threatens the future of our grandchildren, for us to walk away from that is grotesquely irresponsible. It's also true that the nations that are going to pay the greatest price for global warming are the poor nations of the world. And yet they've contributed the least to global warming. We have contributed the most. For us to walk away from that is immoral.
Former presidential advisor David Gergen. Meanwhile, here in New Zealand, Trump's decision is generally viewed as a step backwards, not only for climate change, but for the US as a powerful player on the international stage. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
A political scientist at Canterbury University, Associate Professor Bronwyn Hayward, says there's a significant risk of the US being politically isolated from Donald Trump's decision, weakening his and the country's negotiating power. She says the situation is vastly different from when the US pulled out of the Kyoto Climate Agreement in 2001.
Very big difference is that 20 years later there's been a big shift in public understanding. So while the politics is deeply polarised, overall the US sentiment is much more hesitant. People can see climate change now. They understand it at a deeper level. They are anxious about it.
Mrs. Hayward says America First policies are also not always in the interests of other countries, such as New Zealand.
So it actually makes it harder to get international agreements because it reminds the rest of the world that America is out for America. The second part is that Trump ironically looks weak from my perspective now because he hasn't been able to make a clean break.
he has had to offer the olive branch of re-entering the agreement. And that's obviously because of his own internal divisions within the White House and within the Republican Party.
Professor James Renwick from the School of Geography, Environment and Earth Sciences at Victoria University agrees it could be the beginning of the end for the US leading on the international stage and could open the door for leadership from China. He expects the decision will spur on other countries to do more for the climate.
In a funny way, it could be a good thing because it's giving the Chinese, the Europeans, New Zealand, all countries the opportunity to step into the breach and, take leadership and really ramp up the ambition and start to reduce emissions in countries except for the US. I mean, the US is no longer the biggest emitter.
A global conservation group, World Wildlife Fund, says the Paris Agreement is bigger than one nation and one man. Its New Zealand campaigner, David Tong, says it's pleasing that European leaders have said the accord cannot be renegotiated.
It's also hard to see what it is that Trump does want to renegotiate, because much of what he is calling for is what Todd Stern and his negotiating team under the Obama administration did negotiate into the Paris Agreement.
The Climate Change Minister, Paula Bennett, says New Zealand is committed to reducing emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. She says it's a step backwards that the US will no longer be part of it, but she says the accord and New Zealand's relationship with America is still intact.
Although we may differ in things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Climate Change Agreement, that doesn't mean that we can't still find alliances in other areas, like with our Five Eyes, and hopefully in other areas of trade, because they're still very important to us. So, it's a bit like we don't have to agree on everything, but that doesn't mean that we then need to disengage completely. And I think that visit next week is really important to make sure that we do continue those strong relationships.
Next week, the US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will visit Wellington. The Labour leader Andrew Little says the government must use that visit to strongly voice opposition to Donald Trump's decision.
This is a perfect opportunity for the New Zealand government to show some leadership and make forceful representations to Secretary Tillerson to say this is not acceptable, the whole world needs to be in this, and that what the US has done shows a retreat from leadership rather than doing something positive.
Tillerson arrives in Wellington next Tuesday to meet with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister, Jerry Brownlee. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
And later on Checkpoint, for a big picture take on this, I'll be talking to Dr. Adrian Macy, who was New Zealand's first climate change ambassador. That will be after 6 o'clock. It's 5:18. Thank you for being with us. The brother of a missing Christchurch man, Michael McGrath, who hasn't been seen in nearly 2 weeks, has made a desperate plea for information. The 49-year-old builder was last seen at his Hallsville home on Sunday, the 21st of May. The police raided 2 houses earlier this week as part of the investigation into his disappearance and have forensically examined some vehicles. Simon McGrath told a media conference at the Christchurch Central Police Station this afternoon that his brother's disappearance is completely out of character.
Michael lived alone. He enjoyed his work as a builder. His family and friends are desperate to get him home, and we're making this plea for any sightings or activity. Someone could have some sort of information which will help police. It might appear trivial, but it may be the piece of the puzzle we need to solve this mystery.
That's Michael's brother Simon. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says the police are speaking to a number of people of interest, but the investigation is ongoing.
As part of our ongoing inquiries this weekend, we'll be running quite a large search phase around the Sabies Road area of Hawesville, using search and rescue teams, both civilian and police. The search is scheduled to commence from tomorrow, mid to late morning, in the hope of gathering any evidence that may help us locate Michael.
Daryl Sweeney says the police have released a photo of Mr McGrath's blue mountain bike in the hope that someone may recall seeing him. He says they are still hoping to find Mr McGrath alive, and they welcome any assistance from members of the public. Coming up on Checkpoint, an Auckland council worker who lives with her children and grandchildren because they can't afford to live separately says a living wage will change their lives. And Whangarei prepares to welcome the Lions. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And a reminder, we haven't been doing many of them lately, but you can watch us on Freeview Channel 50, Face TV, which is Sky Channel 83, and of course the RNZ website. Let's go to the Philippines now, where the terrible aftermath of an attack in a Manila casino is still unfolding. This morning, a gunman burst into the casino in the Resorts World complex and began firing shots and setting gaming tables alight. He was found dead as police stormed the building. Amid reports the drama was over, but this afternoon it emerged at least 34 bodies. Some reports now saying 36 have been found inside the complex. It's believed the victims suffocated in the panic as they tried to flee choking smoke. The BBC's Sarah Corker has more on how this all unfolded.
As gunshots ring out, chaotic scenes of panic. Hundreds of guests and employees run for safety from this popular hotel resort close to Manila's international airport. Security forces arrived at the scene quickly and heavily armed. A lone gunman had burst into the busy casino, firing an assault rifle and setting fire to gaming tables. One person in a nearby building filmed the incident from her balcony early on Friday morning.
Gunshots, oh my god. Oh, right behind Resorts World. And you can see the smoke and there's gunshots and people are shooting at each other.
SWAT teams searched the building for many hours. Then, just after dawn, the manhunt ended. Police confirmed the gunman had set himself on fire and died. And the fire service said there were multiple casualties, many suffocating as they tried to flee the smoke.
What we do now for certain is that, according to the police, that he was acting alone during the incident, which has killed so far, according to the Bureau of Fire Protection, they have found 34 bodies inside the Resorts World Casino on the second and the third floor of that particular building.
Others were injured in the stampede to escape. The police said the motive for this attack was robbery rather than terrorism. The gunman had filled a bag with casino gambling chips and shots were not aimed at people.
We can say that this is not an act of terror. Why isn't it an act of terror? Because it did not have the element of violence, the threat and intimidation that lead to terrorism. If he was a terrorist or part of ISIS, he would have fired at people inside.
This incident comes as the Philippines has been on heightened alert amid a crisis in the south of the country, where troops have been battling Islamist rebels. Back in the capital, at least 54 people have been treated in hospital. And outside the complex, relatives of those caught up in this attack face an anxious wait for news of their loved ones.
That's the BBC's Sarah Corker. New Zealand is edging ever closer to legalising medicinal cannabis. The government is giving the green light to doctors to prescribe products containing what's called CBD without Ministry of Health approval. The substance found in cannabis has potential therapeutic value with little or no psychoactive properties, but there's a catch: hardly any CBD products are available in New Zealand. So what's this all mean? Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
For Rose Renton, this has been a long time coming. Her teenage son Alex died of severe epilepsy nearly 2 years ago. His last months in the spotlight as he and his family fought for the right to use medicinal cannabis.
I know Alex, as a person, when he was here, cared about people. He would say this is going to help many people. That's what his memory has become.
Alex was the first person in New Zealand to be granted an exemption to use the drug. The government approved an oil containing CBD as a one-off treatment. He died about a month later, but Ms Renton says he got the treatment too late.
It should have been there. It should never have been removed from the medicine cabinet. It should have been a first-line treatment, not a last-line treatment. It's non-toxic. I know there were a lot of toxic drugs in his system. 43 drugs went through his system while he was in hospital in that induced coma. And, the outcome could have been very different.
And while she welcomes the step forward, she points out it's a very small step. Here's how the Associate Health Minister, Peter Dunn, describes it.
This will make it easier for access to CBD-based products, but it doesn't immediately bring about a revolution.
That's because there are very few CBD products which currently meet the standard required to be prescribed. In fact, just one is undergoing clinical trials in New Zealand right now and is still several years away. It's also tough to get the products into the country, mainly because of strict import-export rules overseas.
Really what today's announcement is about is future-proofing the system, because I don't think that current sort of cautious international approach is likely to remain in place forever.
The move has won praise from the Medical Association. Its chair, Dr. Kate Baddock, hopes more products will come available now that CBD is easier to prescribe.
They are an effective pain relief. The CBDs have very little, if any, effect on the mind. They are medicinal.
And she doesn't think doctors will hold back from using it to treat patients.
To be honest, I don't put a lot of stock in it. Most GPs who are in practice, baby boomers grew up in the 60s and 70s. That was when marijuana was widely used.
The charity Medical Cannabis Awareness has been pushing for patients to have more access to the drug. Right now it's advocating for a 12-year-old child who suffers from severe seizures to be given CBD. A spokesperson, Shane LeBrun, says it's been a 9-month battle, but the latest move should smooth the road in future.
This basically removes all the paperwork of having to get peer review, having to go to the ministry for approval. So in the longer term, once these products are more readily available, they'll just be able to hand them out like they hand out Panadol. Not as an over-the-counter medicine, but on the prescription side of things.
Some New Zealanders are already using CBD, albeit illegally. Chris Fowley from the marijuana lobby group Normal imported a gum from overseas to help treat his irritable bowel syndrome.
It works. It's like the miracle cure. I'm not saying it'll be like that for everyone, but for me, it works. And I've never found anything that works for my IBS, but this gum, within 10, 15 minutes chewing it, I'm just right as rain.
That gum, though, still won't be okay under this law change, as it doesn't qualify as a regulated medicine. Mr. Fowley says this is a step forward, but New Zealand still has a long way to go.
It's still not available, and it's still going to be really expensive. What we really need is for patients and local companies to be able to produce it here and do it for low cost, grow your own, or get someone to grow it for you.
It's not the end of Rose Renton's campaign either.
It's still only half the plant. There's a lot of conditions that benefit from the THC, but we've won half a race, that's how it feels, but it's definitely a great day for New Zealand medicine.
The government hopes to push through the law change required to ease restrictions on CBD in about 2 months. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
For those of you who've consumed no New Zealand media over the past week, the British and Irish Lions are in the country and their tour begins tomorrow night. Once they wound their ways along our highways and byways. The 1971 Lions, for example, went to Timaru, Greymouth, Gisborne, Masterton, showering their particular kind of rugby gold on communities too small for such visits now. Instead, these Lions play 3 games in Auckland, yes 3, and only leave the main centres twice for Rotorua and for Whangarei this weekend. And in the north, they're delighted to be a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. To prove it, our producer Bridget Burke called the Mayor of Whangarei, Cheryl Mai, and asked her to leave her office, go out now, walk into the CBD and find a Lions supporter. And then 3 minutes later, we called her back.
Hello, Cheryl speaking.
Mayor Cheryl, it's John Campbell. How are you?
Hey, John Campbell. I just watched some little kids, they walked past and they were going, roar, and I said, are you Lions fans?
and were they just part of the excitement, the vibe?
They're just part of the excitement and vibe. They're wandering down the street and their granddad is over from England, so talk about perfect timing.
Oh, you're joking. So they've just wandered past you, have they?
Yeah, they were. They were. Well, I nabbed them. They were not going to let them go now.
Have you accosted them knowing Radio New Zealand was going to call? God, no wonder you're Mayor. You're quick on your feet.
Too right I am, John. Absolutely.
So have you got Lions fans with you?
I've got Lions fans standing in front of me, absolutely.
You couldn't pass the phone over, could you?
I could absolutely pass the phone over.
Okay, thank you. We'll talk to you in a sec. Thank you so much.
Okay, here he is.
Hello, my name is John.
Hello,
who am I talking to?
My name is Colin Wynn.
Hello, my name is John. You're on Radio New Zealand.
Oh,
wow. Welcome to New Zealand. When did you arrive?
A week ago.
And what are you doing? Just travelling around?
Well, my daughter lives in Auckland, so I've come over for a holiday and the rugby as well.
And you're up north, in the so-called winterless north. You'd be wanting to complain about that phrase at the moment, wouldn't you?
Oh, my God, yeah. They talk about the rain in England, but this is a bit much.
So are you going to the game tomorrow?
Yes, I am. Well, we are, yes, with us, yeah.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is at the moment, yeah. It's early days yet. We always start our tour with great deal of excitement.
Yeah, you've brought 41 fine players. That's a fantastic squad.
It's a good squad this time, yeah. We're ever hopeful this time. Best squad we've had for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and some fine men in it too, which is, it's a good squad on and off the field. That's exciting stuff. Have you ever been up north before? Have you ever been up to Northland?
I've been around, yeah. I've been up as far as Cape Reinga. This is my 5th time in New Zealand now.
You've probably seen more of the country than many New Zealanders, I suspect.
Yeah, we do a bit of touring, yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, and may the best team win in all the games.
I think so, yeah. At the end of the day, that's all we want, yeah. As long as it's the Lions, we don't mind.
Excellent. Can you pass me back to the Mayor?
Yeah, will do.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Lovely. Bye-bye.
Hey, John.
Hello. So that's it, isn't it? I mean, for people who are listening, who don't give a damn about rugby and wonder what all the fuss is about, it's that, isn't it? It's people like that who are suddenly in your town on a wintry weekend in June, spending money and having fun.
Precisely. That is absolutely the buzz that's beginning to happen. It's so exciting.
It is exciting. And all the accommodation's been gone for months, I guess?
Yes. We do, however, have some really generous locals who have said, if anybody needs a bed, we'll billet them. So our eyesight has compiled a list of people who are, keen to have fans, that we don't want them homeless. We don't want them on the street tomorrow night.
No. So can you explain? So if somebody is travelling around in their camper van listening to this now and they need somewhere to stay tomorrow night, how do they get in contact with these kind people?
So they just contact our eyesight, which is our visitor information centre.
Right,
and
great.
they've got a list of all of the people who have phoned them and said, we've got a bed or a back lawn or whatever it is if there's a camper van. So, we're definitely getting into the spirit of opening our doors to these fans.
Yeah, and those fans, if they're billeted in a house in Whangarei or nearby, maybe a bit up the coast or whatever, they'll remember that forever. They'll probably remember that longer than they remember the game, right?
That's exactly the type of experience that you never forget. It's that personal touch and knowing that you've been with a family who otherwise you'd never meet.
No, that's
great
right.
Opportunity.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And also, lest we forget, I don't want to be crass and lower the tone, but it's a financial bonanza for the city too, isn't it?
Well, the people I was just talking to, they said, look, we're in town. And we're here to spend some money, and where can we park? Getting all the tips from the locals. So it's a real boost for our retailers who rely on things like this to be able to share the love.
Yeah, other than the game itself, which is tomorrow night, kick-off 7:30. What else is happening? Is anything special happening around it?
Yep, we've got a late lunch happening in the laneway, which is a covered area in our CBD. And so lots of people are putting on wonderful food and hospitality in the laneway. We've got activities down at our town base and our waterfront where there'll be face painting and buskers and entertainment and also, lots of food, cafe things happening down there. We've got Crafternoon, which is at our the local bar called the Butter Factory, and they've got craft beers happening tomorrow afternoon as well. And then, of course, all of the bars are getting themselves geared up for the fans to pour into during and after the game.
Yeah, fantastic. You going tomorrow night?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope it's a wonderful weekend in the north. And thank you for joining us. And thank you for talent wrangling on the footpath of Whangarei as you went along.
Thanks, John.
Lovely to talk to you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Coming up on Checkpoint, Nona with business news to end the week. Team New Zealand blitzes BAR. Hotels and motels considering joining forces to take legal action against Auckland's council bed tax, and why 40 people will voluntarily spend 40 hours in a tiny cage with nothing to do but eat cereal. But before all of that, RNZ headlines with Katrina Batten.
At least 36 people died after a gunman burst into a Manila casino, firing shots and setting gaming tables alight in a botched robbery attempt. A spokesman for the Philippine president says there's no evidence linking the attack at the Resorts World Manila Entertainment Complex to fighting between government troops and Islamist militants in the country's south. Most of the dead suffocated in choking smoke. Civilian search and rescue teams are joining police this weekend in the hunt for missing Christchurch man Michael McGrath. The 49-year-old builder was last seen at his Holswell home on Checkett's Avenue 2 weeks ago. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says the search will concentrate around Sabas Road in Holswell. Dozens of state and local government officials in the United States have condemned Donald Trump's decision to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The mayors of 61 cities, including Los Angeles, New York and Boston, have promised to meet the commitments agreed to in the accord. The mayor of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto, says it's now up to the cities to act responsibly if the federal government cannot be relied on to do so. A woman who's lobbied for medicinal cannabis since the death of her son hopes a law change will keep others from suffering the same fate. The government is making it easier for doctors to prescribe a form of medicinal cannabis. Rose Renton's son Alex died of severe epilepsy in 2015. He was the first New Zealander to be granted an exemption to use medicinal cannabis a month beforehand. Ms. Renton says she won't stop fighting till medicinal cannabis is widely available. A jury has found a Hastings doctor guilty of stupefying and indecently assaulting male patients. David Kang Huat Lim was convicted on 5 charges of indecent assault against 3 patients and 5 of disabling through sedation at a medical centre in 2014. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. The living wage coming up. Before all of that, it's Tender Business News now on a Friday night to end the week. Nona Peltier. And Nona, we're looking at a specialty insurer, CBL.
That's right, CBL Insurance. So you probably aren't familiar with them, but it's been around for a long time, this company.
What do they do?
They sell insurance to brokers.
Right.
So they're a broker, insurance broker's insurer. Yeah. And they've come up with a product called, sort of, I guess it's a builder's bond. So what that is a bond that builders can buy from the insurance, from their broker. And it helps them meet the new legal requirements over contracts in construction. So the government's changed the laws there to tighten things
payments,
up.
all of that kind of stuff. Right,
so,
absolutely.
So subcontractors were getting, there was a lot of problems with contractors not paying subcontractors, construction contractors going out of business, subcontractors left without any way of getting their withheld payments.
People just disappearing without trace,
exactly.
Basically, before they paid the bills. Some of this sort of reeks of the awfulness of the leaky home stuff at the end of it.
That's the old days,
yeah, right. So it was the Wild West, really, wasn't it?
It really was. So
and incrementally, the regulations are being stamped on.
Exactly. So this is a little bit complicated. Lawyers and lawyers, accountants, insurers are still trying to get their head around it. But basically, if you're a contractor, you have to put the money that you retain from the subcontractors, so you hold that 10% back. You have to put it in a trust. You have to have a bank guarantee, or you can have a bond. So CBL has developed this bond.
So this is a market first, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a new in the market,
yep.
And it's been developed specially for the New Zealand market. So if you're a contract builder, you can go along and buy this bond. Now, not to say that it's going to be a very popular product, but it fills the gap because this law came into effect in April and some contractors still haven't got their head around it. So it's if you're like doing a job that's, say, $1 million, you've subcontracted that job, you have to hold back 10%. That's $100,000. That's a lot of money.
Right.
So this way you can buy a bond. The insurance company guarantees it. And if you go bad, then the insurance company goes after you,
okay,
right?
Yeah, good,
so there you go.
Yeah, we could have done it with that 20 years ago, I suspect.
Probably, yeah. So it's an improvement anyway. It's a guarantee for subcontractors. So what else happened in the markets, you might be wondering?
I am wondering on a Friday evening, our Nona.
Well, you know what? World stock prices are at their highest level. The markets are really doing well everywhere. The U.S. dollar is very strong. There's very high expectations for the non-farm payroll numbers that come out overnight in the United States. If they meet expectations, the U.S. Federal Reserve is likely to raise interest rates, and that's going to strengthen the U.S.
Drive
dollar.
the dollar up, yep.
Yeah, so the markets are pretty buoyant at the moment, and that's flowed through to our market. Our NZX Top 50 Index, it rose 0.7%, so that's quite hefty. 49 points to 7,500. That's a nice round number for us. And the New Zealand dollar was also a bit stronger, 70.8 US cents. And considering the US dollar is strong, that's pretty good. 95.7, that's a 4-month high against the Australian there. And 55 pence, still holding strong. And that was the markets for this week.
Thanks for your fantastic work this week, Nona Peltier. Have a wonderful long weekend.
And you.
Thank you, Nona. Living wage campaigners say the Auckland Council's decision to increase the pay of their lowest paid workers is an astounding victory. The living wage policy, which was passed by councillors yesterday, will take full effect in 2 years' time, when their wages will increase to $21 an hour. Jessie Chang has more.
It's a decision Deidre Swolger describes as life-changing. She's been working as a customer support representative for the council's Parks, Pools and Leisure for the past 5 years. Deidre lives with her 3 daughters and 3 grandchildren because it's too expensive to live separately in Auckland.
I'm so rapt to hear about it. It's just going to mean that I'm going to be able to provide more choices for them to make. Maybe private lessons in education, a little bit more as far as musically inclined.
Yesterday afternoon, the Auckland Council passed the policy, which means all of its workers will be paid at least $18 an hour by this September, increasing each year until 2019. A Public Service Association delegate, Chris Randall, who's worked at the council for more than 16 years, says he's delighted by the news.
It's a good thing in terms of recognising that Auckland in particular is a very costly place to live these days. With the housing prices and rentals in particular very, very high.
Mr Randall says library, leisure and event workers, many of whom currently earn just above the minimum wage, would benefit the most from the policy. About 2,000 people, including those working in Auckland Transport and Watercare, will get the pay rise, which is estimated to cost nearly $2 million in the first year. However, the policy doesn't cover contractors, volunteers and trainees, something Living Wage Movement Aotearoa New Zealand says needs to change. Its national convener, Annie Newman, says some private companies pay their employees lower wages in order to secure contracts from the council.
The winning contractor has to deliver the service within the price that they have won the contract for, and that means that a lot of those workers are very low paid.
Ms Newman says majority of the rubbish collectors and cleaners hired by the council are contractors. The Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, Michael Woodhouse, said in a statement that if employers could afford to pay more than the minimum wage, then they should. However, he said ultimately the decision was up to them. The current living wage is $20.20 an hour. For Checkpoint, Ko Jessie Chang, Aho.
Coming up to 17 minutes to 6, Team New Zealand has demolished Sir Ben Ainsley's BAR team in light wins in the America's Cup today, with the Briton conceding its first race he's ever given up during the race itself. Dean Barker's SoftBank team, Japan, nearly took the upset, leading Oracle Team USA most of the way, raising the question of whether the pair's formal tie-up meant the Japanese boat gifted the win to the Americans. Our America's Cup reporter, Todd Nile, is in Bermuda.
The rich are getting richer and the poor are having a hell of a time sailing in Bermuda. Sir Ben Ainsley's big budget BAR got the jump on Team New Zealand, but nosedived when a control failed, fell to a 6-minute deficit, then gave up.
You know, our light airfoil configuration, certainly compared to Team New Zealand, isn't as powerful, and so we are going to struggle in those very light conditions like we saw today. But you know, they sailed a great race, and they've been sailing really well all through this qualifying series. Proving to be probably the team to beat.
On the TV pictures, you look pretty exasperated.
Well, it's frustrating when you're struggling for speed and you're up against great competition like that. You need everything you can get, and if you're on the back foot a little bit, we had a really nice start. We had the lead, but we just didn't have the horsepower, and that's tough to take sometimes.
Team New Zealand look as sharp as ever, even in the light conditions, and helmsman Peter Burling says the boat worked well.
I think the Oracle guys and SoftBank guys were going really well in that light area as well. So for ourselves, we've still got plenty to work on, but we're obviously the first opportunity to line up against everyone in light air, and we're really happy with how we're going.
From the points point of view, you must have been wishing Dean Barker on in that encounter with Oracle.
Yeah, he obviously got off to a great start there, and it's only a bit of a shame that the Oracle boys ran him down, but it's exciting for us seeing just how much people are gaining and losing off little decisions around the course, little errors in boat handling or little errors in motoring. So for ourselves, it's just about trying to keep on improving, keep getting better, and keep learning from what those guys are doing just as much as ourselves.
Had Dean Barker's SoftBank managed to win against partner Team Oracle, the defender would have lost its 1-point advantage over Team New Zealand. I asked Dean Barker whether that partnership allowed his team to deny Oracle a crucial win.
It was quite a pleasant pre-start. Certainly enjoyed the sort of the way that all kind of unfolded and the first 2/3 of the race, but unfortunately we chose the wrong gate at the bottom, and I can assure you it wasn't a deliberate act, if that's what you're asking.
For his part, Oracle Team USA's Jimmy Spittle conceded a mistake or two, but happy to have passed the test.
You know, to be quite honest, I'm really happy we got a day like today to test our light air package. We may get another look at it tomorrow, but certainly looking at the end of the week, Saturday looks like great breeze. So probably everyone's back into their high-speed setup, but no, it's been good for us to test our light air package.
Team New Zealand faces an uphill battle in the next 2 days if it wants to climb over Oracle Team USA, win the Challenger qualifiers and bag a bonus that counts if it starts in the America's Cup final. In effect, Team New Zealand must win its remaining 3 races, including over Oracle, and someone else also needs to beat Oracle to negate both its bonus point and its right to be the winner if there's a tie-break. It's a tall order. In Bermuda, mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Todd Niall tēnei.
Hotels and motels are considering joining forces to take legal action against Auckland Council's so-called bed tax. The targeted rate, which will see motels pay between $1 and $3 per room per night and hotels up to $6, was approved yesterday, as you would have heard on Checkpoint last night. It won't be introduced until July after it's formally adopted at the end of the month. Laura Tupou has more.
The vote might be done and dusted, but tourism industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the fight is far from over.
Certainly the accommodation sector in Auckland is unanimous that this targeted rate is unfair and can't be justified, and they're prepared to do whatever they can to stop it. That may or may not involve legal action. That will be up to the legal advice that they gather over the coming weeks. You're certainly not going to see 100 businesses turning up in court lodging legal action, but it is possible that the industry may come together and act jointly, or different parties within the industry might take separate action.
Zita Lau from the Devereux Boutique Hotel in Remuera says they already pay high commercial rates, and adding the new rate will further squeeze profits.
What we earn is nearly half going to tax, and then maybe to other workers or other suppliers. So what we get at the end, we don't have much left for us.
The manager of Oak Tree Motel in Epsom, Ray Lee, is also disappointed at the news.
We got mostly, we got the guests coming from local. We don't get much from overseas. Yeah, it's being very disappointed.
Down the road at the Dilworth Motel, manager Sean Amon says he thought a majority of councillors were against the proposal and it wouldn't go ahead. But now it's passed, the future of the family business of 15 years isn't looking bright.
Definitely there is some talk that maybe the business could not be viable anymore with the calculations that we've received on what the increased rates will be.
The manager at Cornwall Park Motor Inn, Dan Wayu, shares concerns that the business may have to close.
Of course, they will. Our cleaner, our staff, our receptionists, they will lose the job immediately. This is not a small influence. There's a big influence for all of us. So we feel really frustrated. If the rates comes to that high, I think we are going to die.
The council says the $14 million raised each year will be used to replace ratepayer funding spent on attracting tourists. But Chris Roberts from tourism industry Aotearoa says it's unfair.
The situation we have is that a sector that gets 9% of the visitor spend is being asked to pay 50% of the city's entire tourism and event promotion. That ratio clearly is unfair. And if it was more in line with the actual return that the sector gets, then that's something that would not have any opposition to it.
Chris Roberts says the emails are still flying backwards and forwards each hour as accommodation providers work through the consequences of the council's vote. He says any legal action wouldn't happen until after the targeted rate is formally approved at a council meeting on the 29th of June. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou aho.
It's coming up to 10 minutes to 6 breaking news, a story that we've been looking at a great deal on Checkpoint over the past few weeks. The Manawatu Gorge Every time we talk to someone, they tell us it's about to reopen. Well, a statement has just come in from NZTA saying it is remaining closed. The New Zealand Transport Agency has confirmed that State Highway 3, the Manawatu Gorge, will remain closed as work continues to assess the safety of the route around the site of recent slips. Transport Agency Highway Manager Ross Ianson says geotechnical engineers have been in the gorge inspecting the 2 slip sites while repair work has continued this week, and I quote, "The geotechnical engineers will be reporting back to us next week with a detailed assessment on the stability of these slip sites." So they're still getting assessments, back to quote, "confirming when conditions will be safe enough to allow traffic to travel through the gorge and whether any additional work will be required." Continuing the quote, "We understand that this lengthy closure and the uncertainty around reopening is frustrating for everyone affected by it. We will reopen the road as soon as we are confident that it is safe to do so, and we thank everyone for their patience and understanding of the difficulty in completing the work." Obviously, there's been a series of dates which they'd hoped the gorge would be reopened by. They haven't happened, although none of them are nearly as long as the year almost that the gorge was closed, 2011-12. We've covered this at length on Checkpoint, and that is just through a short time ago. This long weekend, 40 people will voluntarily spend 40 hours in a tiny cage with nothing to do and nothing to eat but cereal. It's a world-first stunt to bring attention to factory farming. The volunteers have had to sign their life away because nobody knows how it's going to go. Zach Fleming went to have a look.
It's an inconspicuous building nestled between a car dealership and a lunch bar. But over the weekend, it'll be home to a world-first social experiment.
40 people are going to be caged for 40 hours.
In the same cage, together, to simulate and raise awareness of factory farming.
About 1.2 square metres per person, so that is really a small amount of space. It's just over the size of a phone box.
Mandy Carter from animal welfare group SAFE, they're the brains behind it. The cage, in Ponsonby in Auckland, is around the size of 1.5 boxing rings, or a third of a tennis court. On first look, it doesn't even seem like 40 people could fit in it standing, let alone lying down to sleep.
They're only going to be allowed out to the toilet at set times, so they're going to also have to get used to not having that freedom to come and go as they choose. Like factory farmed animals, they're going to be fed a very boring grain-fed diet of muesli and soy milk 4 times a day. So it is going to be a life of deprivation and restriction.
And no phones, no books to read, no entertainment, no creature comforts. A psychologist will even be on hand. And yet so many people volunteered, SAFE had to turn people down. Danielle Hart is the oldest volunteer, at 55.
I didn't even have to think about it. The minute I saw it, I just thought, what a fantastic idea. If it helps raise awareness, then I was all in.
Ariana Brunette is one of the youngest, at just 17.
For me, it's just 40 hours of my time, but for them, it's their entire life. So, yeah, I'm prepared to give that up.
By them, she means the estimated more than 100 million pigs, birds, cows and fish that are factory farmed in New Zealand. SPCA Chief Scientist Anya Dale says factory farmed animals don't have good quality of life.
By default, these animals have intense confinement. These do not meet the behavioural needs of these animals. I mean, these are animals directly in our care that we are using for an end purpose. So it's responsible and also legislated for that we meet their physical health and behavioural needs, which ultimately means giving these animals a life worth living.
The Ministry for Primary Industries Director of Animal and Animal Products, Paul Danstead, said current legislation is based on all points of view and the best available scientific evidence. He says MPI is actively involved in improving the welfare of animals in New Zealand, referencing the banning of sow stalls for pigs in 2015 and the phasing out of battery cages for layer hens. Egg producers have until 2022 to get rid of them completely. Michael Brooks, Executive Director of the Egg Producers Federation, says farmers will abide by whatever the government or the public says is acceptable.
This is an emotive topic, and we understand that. And that's why it's so important that you actually have the decisions made on welfare by people who look at all the studies, who have expertise, and they say that's it. Industry then follows it. If there's a range of choices, let consumers make the choice. If consumers over a period of time go, all to free range and barn, then farmers would follow them.
And ultimately, that's what SAFE wants the stunt to achieve, for people to vote with their wallets.
We really want people to realise that the power lies with them, that they can be the ones to help animals, and we don't have to put up with the terrible way things are.
The 40 hours starts at 10 p.m. tonight. The entire thing will be live streamed. For Checkpoint, Zach Flynn.
A Christchurch dairy owner who suffered a spate of robberies says a new fund to help at-risk stores could cover the cost of a baseball bat but wouldn't put a dent in the $40,000 he spent on safety improvements. The government is offering $1.8 million to help shops at high risk of being robbed to buy things like panic alarms, fog cannons and safes for cash and cigarettes. David Lee, who owns a night and day store in Woolston, Christchurch, says he bought an electronic cigarette dispenser, made a safe room for workers and changed the store's layout after being robbed 8 times in 7 months. Mr Lee told our reporter Maya Burry the fund announced yesterday barely scratches the surface of the national problem.
Well, the cigarette dispenser was $20,000 and the refit, moving the counter around, was probably going to be about another $20,000. I don't think the volume of money is enough to go for to anything. Maybe another baseball bat. I've just told you what we spent, and obviously that is just going to be nowhere near that, the volume of money. I'm not even sure we're eligible because obviously we're part of a chain, 19-day franchise, so it's probably a non-event for us, I think. So,
I mean, what do you think would help?
Well, they need to look at the law of these young people that keep coming in here and getting a slap on the hand. I think that's the one to stop it. We've already seen one come in here, he got prison time and that sort of thing, so it's, yeah, they need to look at more of that.
David Lee, who owns that night and day store in Woolston, Christchurch. Staying in Christchurch, the National Cat Show is back in the Garden City this Sunday. The first time cat lovers from across the country have met in our second largest city since the earthquakes. The organisers are hoping for a large turnout with over 240 manicured and blow-wave specimens on display. And judges flying in from all over the world. Our reporter Logan Church caught up with one feline competitor and her owner ahead of the show.
Dorothy Hawson has been competing in cat shows for over half a century, entering her first competition just before man landed on the moon.
They were advertising this National Cat Show and I thought, oh, never heard of cat shows, could be fun. And I had 2 Seal Point Siamese, so I entered them as in the pet section. And one of them took an instant dislike to everybody and wanted to tear them limb from limb, and the other one sort of said, oh, this is nice, I think I'll stay a bit more.
Now she's retired, but sits on the Canterbury All-Breed Cat Club board and is helping to organise the National Cat Show on Sunday.
Do go away, there's a good girl.
She'll be entering Gypsy, a long-haired Bumilla, into this year's show, which is back in the city after a long break.
We were all set to have one, and then along came the February earthquake, and nobody wanted to come near Christchurch then.
But Dorothy Hawson says the cat show industry is facing a crisis, with turnouts far lower in recent years. She used to see nearly 1,000 cats entered in a national cat show, but this year only 240 are expected.
Our entries are not as high as they used to be, and I think we're even losing shows simply because they don't have the time to put into these shows. They've got other calls on them. You know, if you've got a young family, you've got them going to sports at the weekends, and something has to give, and let's face it, your family comes first.
Ms Hawson says global warming is also part of the problem.
The cats breed later in the season now, and people, you can't show your cat if she's either having kittens or got kittens, and you can't show kittens until they're 4 months old. So sometimes it's right into June before some of these cats hit the bench.
Regardless, up to 40 short-haired breeds and 20 long-haired breeds are expected on Sunday, with judges flying in from the United States, the Netherlands and Australia to join their New Zealand counterparts. Dorothy says there is still a lot of work for her to do.
You want your cat to look the best it can be on the show day. So you primp it and trim it and bath it and, all the rest of it. She's due to be bathed later this afternoon.
But given the amount of work involved, is there any money in these shows?
Sorry, no. You see that big black hole down there? You do it for the love of it, not for the money.
The National Cat Show is taking place at the Bishopdale YMCA this Sunday. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church, Chennai.
Just before we move on, we want to point out that Logan Church is an intern out of the Broadcasting School in Christchurch. He's been with us a few months doing work experience. You're doing a fantastic job, Logan. We want to say he shot and scripted and edited that himself, and we're delighted to have you as part of the team. Thank you, Logan. After the news at 6, Dr. Adrian Macy was New Zealand's first climate change ambassador, and we talked to him about Donald Trump saying we're out of here on the Paris Accord, and also what China is doing in their leadership of global warming. All of that and more coming up. But before that, a Friday night quiz. What is the first name of our program's executive producer? See if you can guess.
RNZ News at 6. Talofa lava, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Governors in the American states of California, New York and Washington are forming a coalition to uphold the Paris Climate Change Agreement after Donald Trump announced he's pulling the US out of the accord. The mayors of more than 60 cities have also vowed to do the same, while some of America's biggest corporations have condemned the president's move. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
IBM, General Electric, Apple, Facebook, Google, some of the biggest names in corporate America have publicly expressed their disapproval. Disney's chief executive and the entrepreneur Elon Musk have resigned from White House advisory councils. The head of Goldman Sachs took to Twitter for the first time to complain that the withdrawal from the Paris Accord was a setback for the environment and also America's leadership position in the world. But there's strong, though not universal, Republican support for the move, and many working-class voters who helped put Donald Trump in the White House regard this as a campaign promise made good.
Nick Bryant in Washington. The police in the Philippine capital Manila say the victims of an attack at a casino complex died of suffocation or smoke inhalation as they tried to flee the building. At least 36 bodies have been found on 2 floors of the Resorts World building after a lone gunman fired an automatic weapon and set casino tables on fire before killing himself. The BBC's Jonathan Head has more.
The Philippines is on high alert for possible terrorist attacks. And when the first reports of gunfire at the Resorts World casino came in last night, that's what the authorities feared was happening. There was panic in the crowded casino as a man fired an automatic weapon and used petrol to set parts of the building alight. The police now say the incident was unconnected to any militant Islamic groups, despite an apparent claim by so-called Islamic State that the gunman was acting in its name. There are no reports of gunshot injuries.
Jonathan Head reporting. Locals will be joining police search and rescue teams this weekend in the hunt for missing Christchurch man Michael McGrath. The 49-year-old builder was last seen at his Hallswell home on Checkett's Avenue on Sunday the 21st of May. The police raided 2 houses also in Hallswell earlier this week as part of the investigation into his disappearance and have forensically examined some vehicles. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says they've spoken to a number of people of interest, but the investigation is still ongoing.
As part of our ongoing inquiries this weekend, we'll be running quite a large search phase around the Sabies Road area of Hallswell using search and rescue teams, both civilian and police. The search is scheduled to commence from tomorrow in the hope of gathering any evidence that may help us locate Michael.
Daryl Sweeney says police still hope to find Michael McGrath alive. A tourism industry leader says collective legal action might be taken by hotels and motels in order to fight the Auckland Council's bed tax. The targeted rate was approved yesterday. From July, motels will have to pay between about $1 and $3 per room per night and hotels up to $6. The tourism industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says accommodation providers in Auckland say they'll do anything to stop the tax. He says businesses are discussing the issue with lawyers and it's possible legal action will take place either individually or collectively after the rate is adopted. The 65-year-old Pukekohe man has been fined for ill-treating bobby calves. His lawyer had asked for a conviction and discharge, but this was declined by the judge in the Huntly District Court today. He fined Curly Woolley $500. Andrew McRae reports.
Woolley dragged calves by the limbs while transporting them to be slaughtered at a Te Kauwhata pet food factory in August 2015. Judge Denise Clark told Woolley that sending a message of deterrence was important. Last year, another worker at the plant was jailed for 2 years after ill-treating 115 bobby calves. In both cases, the offending came to light after the release of secret video recordings by the animal rights group Farm Watch. Charges against the company Downcow Limited and its director are still before the court. Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
The Trump administration has asked the United States Supreme Court to revive a ban on travellers from 6 Muslim-majority countries. The ban was blocked by lower courts, which ruled it was discriminatory. Elizabeth Brown reports.
The White House has filed 2 emergency applications with the 9 Supreme Court justices. They seek to block 2 lower court rulings, which went against Donald Trump's March 6 executive order, barring entry to people from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria and Yemen for 90 days, while the government implements stricter visa screening. The Justice Department says it's confident the order is within the president's lawful authority to protect America from terrorism. The Supreme Court first has to act on whether to grant the emergency applications, and then it will decide on whether to hear the government's full appeal. If the emergency requests are approved, the ban would go into effect immediately. This is Elizabeth Brown.
It's 6:05. In sport, the Blues coach Tana Umanga says tonight's Super Rugby match against the Queensland Reds in Apia is another step in helping Samoan rugby on the world stage. Umanga, who like many of his players is of Samoan heritage, says they'll feel as if they're representing their families when they take the field tonight.
It'll showcase what they can do and how they can cater for these big games, which is a positive. And they've shown that with when the Manu played the All Blacks last year, and it's just another positive reinforcement of the ability for Samoa to hold these big games.
Blues coach Tana Umanga. Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling is happy with the way his boat sailed in the first day of light conditions at the America's Cup. Winds were just above the allowable minimum, with all skippers saying how challenging the conditions were, although Team New Zealand scored an easy win over Great Britain, who retired from the race. Burling says the team adjusted well to the conditions.
One of the things for us that was really exciting today is even though we didn't race yesterday, we still learned a lot out of it, and we made some changes overnight, and we're really happy with how we're going. It's something that we've put a fair bit of work into our light air setup, and it's really pleasing to see that we're somewhat on the pace.
Helmsman Peter Burling. Team New Zealand race Japan and France tomorrow. The struggling Warriors host the Parramatta Eels in their National Rugby League match in Auckland tonight, with Parramatta sitting 4 places higher on the competition ladder in 9th spot. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Gordon Oliver from the Taranaki Woodcraft Festival, set to show visitors that wood is far from boring, even if it's a food for them. There's a mixtape from Kiwi rock pioneer Larry Morris. Country life meets a farmer who dreams of the day when the takahe will lie down with the lamb, or maybe his beef cattle. And we have a sonic tonic dedicated to epiphanies. On Nights, have one with us after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Periods of rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms north of Auckland City, clearing tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, isolated showers about northern Waikato and western Bay of Plenty today and near the eastern ranges tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, cloudy. A few showers becoming more frequent about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine weather. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy today with isolated showers near the coast, becoming fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog, clearing tomorrow morning. A southerly change tomorrow afternoon or evening with showers. Fiordland, fine today, but low cloud about the lakes. A period of rain tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Have a lovely long weekend.
I'll be working on Monday, but yeah, I will.
Okay, we'll have a lovely normal weekend. Dozens of state and local government officials in the US have condemned Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement in an open letter. The mayors of 61 cities, including Los Angeles, New York and Boston, have promised they will continue to try to meet commitments made under the accord. Trump stuck to a promise that he'd made on the campaign trail last year, aimed at helping blue-collar workers who he feels are under siege in a changing US economy. He said he was acting for the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine. As president, I can put no other consideration before the well-being of American citizens. The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries, leaving American workers, who I love, and taxpayers to absorb the cost in terms of lost jobs, lower wages, shuttered factories, and vastly diminished economic production. Thus, as of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. This includes ending the implementation of the nationally determined contribution and, very importantly, the Green Climate Fund, which is costing the United States a vast fortune.
The move has drawn condemnation and disappointment from European leaders who say the climate change accord can't be renegotiated. The ABC's Ann Barker reports.
Donald Trump says he weighed advice from both sides in the climate debate before making his decision, but in the end he put jobs and the economy above the environment.
The fact that the Paris deal hamstrings the United States while empowering some of the world's top polluting countries should dispel any doubt as to the real reason why foreign lobbyists wish to keep our magnificent country tied up and bound down by this agreement. It's to give their country an economic edge over the United States.
President Trump singled out Pittsburgh as one of 3 cities that stood to gain from a US withdrawal from the climate change accord, yet some of the harshest criticism of his decision has come from inside the US, including from Pittsburgh's mayor Bill Peduto, who on Twitter pointed out that 80% of Pittsburgh voters didn't vote for Donald Trump.
Pittsburgh stands with the world and will follow the Paris Agreement.
Former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders said the decision to withdraw from the Paris Accord represents an abdication of American leadership and an international disgrace. Business leaders too have hit out. The head of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger, and Tesla CEO Elon Musk have both resigned from President Trump's Advisory Council on Policy in protest. The former Secretary of State, John Kerry, played a key role in US negotiations on the Paris Accord.
The president is not, in fact, making America great again in this. He is weakening America. He's losing jobs. He's exposing Americans to worse climate change.
Though Donald Trump's decision was widely expected, world leaders have still reacted with shock. A United Nations spokesman, Stéphane Dujarric, says it's crucial the US remains a leader on environmental issues.
The decision by the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change is a major disappointment for global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote international security.
President Trump, in announcing his decision, has vowed to renegotiate America's participation in the climate accord. But European leaders from France, Germany and Italy say that won't and cannot happen. French President Emmanuel Macron says the US decision is a mistake for the future of the planet.
I do respect this decision, but I do think it is an actual mistake, both for the US and for our planet. We all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
President Trump's decision means the US is now alone with Syria and Nicaragua as the only countries in the world that have failed to sign on to the Paris Accord. Nearly 200 countries remain committed to the pact, and even the world's heaviest polluter, China, who Donald Trump has accused of fabricating the concept of global warming, has vowed to keep up the fight against climate change. Premier Li Keqiang says China was one of the first countries to ratify the Paris deal. China has a saying, promises must be kept and actions must be resolute. He says it's a worldwide call to deal with climate change. It's not something invented by China. There's criticism too from Pacific Island nations who stand to bear the brunt of rising seas caused by global warming. Many see the Paris Climate Accord as a key step towards their salvation. The Marshall Islands says its survival now depends on every other country delivering on the promises they've made in Paris.
A report from the ABC. Dr. Adrian Macy was New Zealand's first climate change ambassador and this country's representative on numerous climate change negotiations, now Senior Associate at Victoria University's Institute for Governance and Policy Studies. He believes the President's public rationale for withdrawing from the agreement simply doesn't stand.
Well, I think he said it himself. Jobs, unfair burden placed on the US. But in fact, I think the real reasons don't seem to be terribly rational, because just taking the jobs point, which I think was the major one, everyone assumes that he wants to try to revive the coal industry. I don't think it's possible to revive that coal industry or the fossil fuel industry unless you dump massive subsidies into it. And just talking about jobs, it's very interesting figures coming out recently. For example, already in renewable energy, there are 5 times as many jobs as there are in the fossil fuels area. And it's renewables, wind and solar, they're a real job creation factory. I think the figures I saw very recently were that jobs are being created in those industries 12 times faster than in the US as a whole. So I don't think one can look for terribly rational reasons for this change.
And in terms of his suggestion that there is the possibility to renegotiate and get more favourable terms for the US and re-enter, that's just simply not feasible in any way, shape or form, is it?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think there possibly is some scope to renegotiate or restate their target. I mean, the Paris Agreement itself is legally binding, and if you want to be in the agreement, you have to have a target or this NDC, National Determined Contribution. That itself is not legally binding. So theoretically, yes, there would be some scope to change that. I have to say that it's interesting, one thing that he didn't say in his address was that climate change is a hoax, so we do nothing about it. He is actually accepting that climate change is real and that the US has got a role in doing something about it. So that may be some progress over what we might have feared a few months ago.
It's interesting to see that in some respects this seems to be galvanising people behind the Paris Accord, so that all the other countries, excluding Nicaragua, Syria and the United States, who remain committed to it, seem increasingly more committed to it as a result of the kind of publicity that Trump's departure is giving it.
Well, absolutely, that has been the reaction. And the obvious fear and worry had been, well, if the US pulls out, the world's richest country, one of the world's richest countries, second biggest emitter, then why should we make an effort? But in fact, the reaction has been quite the reverse. And I think one point that people probably often don't realise is that we would never have had the Paris Agreement had it not been for US and China leadership. It was those two, what I call the G2, that got that agreement done, with, of course, brilliant work by the French. So what's happened now is that at the top level, if you like, at the leadership level of climate change internationally, there's a vacuum. And I think you can see that other countries and groups are stepping in to fill that vacuum. The EU, who have not been, they've been very ambitious, but perhaps not always too effective in the negotiations, they're clearly now stepping up. China has restated its vocation to be, or its wish to be a leader. And others like India, I think, are using the US exit, yes, to reassert their interest and their potential role in stepping up. So you're looking at a situation where the climate leadership will be taken away from the US, and the US will suffer quite a large loss of influence, I would think.
And is the influence a key factor in China's leadership here? What's driving China's increasingly strong commitment to the goals of the Paris Accord?
Well, I think it's at a very deeper level. It's a much deeper level. It's China asserting, if you like, its political influence around the globe, and this is an excellent vehicle for it. China is also a leading investor and innovator of renewable energy technology, so they stand actually to gain a lot from this. So I think that you are seeing, and the Chinese leadership have been quite explicit about the fact that they accept that as the world's major emitter, the biggest emitter, it is their role to play a full leadership role. And if they can't partner with the US, then clearly they'll be partnering with other countries.
So that was our first ever climate change ambassador, talking to us from the corridor at Radio New Zealand, Dr. Adrian Macy, earlier this afternoon. The British and Irish Lions kick off their tour of New Zealand against the Provincial Barbarians tomorrow night. And to mark the event, we take a look back at what makes the Lions of old so unique. Lions tours in the amateur days are things that are long held in the memory. Stories of battles shared, tales turned to legend. RNZ's rugby reporter Joe Porter talks to former greats to find out exactly why the Lions of the past called themselves Blood Brothers.
This is Quinnell burrowing away, the two locks working well together. And from Murdoch, of course, the use of the boot. It's brutal and we don't like to see it here.
Playing the All Blacks for the first time was a brutal baptism for Lions players. It was either match the All Blacks' aggression or be butchered, and match it they did.
This is Llewellyn giving the New Zealand a taste of him. Quinnell in possession, giving New Zealand plenty of brute force, and there goes the boot.
Travelling to the other side of the world with 30 other men, the former Wales first five Phil Bennett, who captained the 1977 Lions to New Zealand, says touring turned strangers into lifelong friends.
After we lost the first test in Wellington, I think we went down to Christchurch or somewhere, and we trained on the Monday, and John Dawes, the coach, absolutely flogged us. I don't think I've ever been so ill in my life. I was sick, running all over the place. It was the hardest session I've ever known in my life. I got back to the hotel, which was opposite these training fields, and I had a message. I was in the room on my own as a captain. You wanted down the team room. And there were two Irish legends there, you know, Willie Duggan, a number 8 who liked this pint, and Moss Keane, a kind of legend from Kilkenny or Kilcare. And the two of them were flat out on their backs, and they were exhausted, dead. And they said, you know, in their Irish accent, which I can't replicate, and they're saying, Phil, jeepers, we don't mind coming and training, but this is worse than the army. Now, if this carries on, we want to go home straight away. We'll have the next flight home. Have a word with John, please. And the two of them were just flat out. But the funniest thing was, after this incredible training session, there they were complaining, and they'd already drunk about 4 cans of lager each, you know. That was the character of the Irish. Great men to go on tour with, and that's what makes the touring so special. You meet great players from other countries.
This year's tour takes just over 4 weeks and comprises 10 matches, while in 1977 they played 25 games over 3 months and were smashed and bashed by teams from Taumarunui to Timaru and everywhere in between. The 1977 Lions winger J.J. Williams says they became a band of brothers.
Gordon Brown outside the 22. Quinnell, McGeechan, J.J. Williams. What a score!
We loved it, and whenever we meet up, we talk about the Lions tours in South Africa and New Zealand. The great moments for young men, and it was all about pride, pitching yourself against the best and trying to win a game. And even though I scored a lot of tries for the Lions, in fact, I'm the second highest try scorer in Lions rugby, all my tries, only one try I had against New Zealand was in 77 in that second test, and I regard that as my most precious try I've scored.
The current Lions will be paid $125,000 just to show up, with a juicy bonus if they can record their first series victory in New Zealand since 1971. By contrast, the Lions of Williams' day were paid a pittance, but he says money was never a motivation.
Well, someone made a lot of money on that tour. You know, the New Zealand Rugby Union and the 4 home unions, but not the players. We were getting, this is hard to believe now, Joe, we were getting an envelope every Sunday night at £2.50. In this little brown envelope. So you can imagine after 16 weeks you had less than £40. It was pathetic, wasn't it? You know, but that's how the amateur rules were in those days.
Nonetheless, Williams says the amateur era did come with its pitfalls, and the catering was one.
And in those days also, Joe, that's how amateur it was, that we were only allowed to have 1 bottle of wine after a meal between 4 people only. Yeah, and in those days, we weren't allowed, we had to drink New Zealand wine. Now, back in the 70s, New Zealand wine wasn't what it is nowadays. So when we would ask for a German wine, they said, oh, no, you've got to drink this New Zealand stuff, which was like vinegar in those days. And that's how it was. We were playing in front of 60,000 people, yet they wouldn't give us a good bottle of wine.
And while New Zealand wine left a bitter taste in the Lions' mouths, a former All Black was quick to sort them out with another tipple.
There's a guy called Waka Nathan, who was a famous All Black wing forward back in the 60s. He was a rep or area manager for one of the local beers, and they sponsored the tour. So wherever we went, we had loads of beer in our team room. They seemed to think that's all we wanted to do was drink.
Though sometimes it was. Williams admits they may have indulged a little too much in some of the quieter towns.
Come on, Joe, there's 32 of us away for 15 weeks. What do you think? We go in a place like Whangarei, and, I remember by then the weather had been bad and we were having a hard time. A lot of the boys are homesick. I remember one day they almost burnt the hotel down. There was a big polystyrene poster up, welcome to Lions. I remember Bobby Windsor, the Pontypool hooker, breaking it all up and setting fire in the middle of the hotel. And the hotel manager, oh my goodness.
The days are long gone when the Lions tramped around the small provinces to be greeted like rock stars, but Bennett and Williams agree that for the players in this year's squad, just being picked is the highest honour. For Checkpoint, Joe Porter.
Lovely story, Joe. It's Friday night, which is never great for traffic. It's a long weekend, which makes things worse. It's raining in parts of the country and there's that big rugby game in Northland. In other words, the country's roads may well be unpleasant places to be. But are we making them more unpleasant with road rage? The AA says we need to think more about our behaviour on the road. Roger Venn is the General Manager of the AA Driving School. I called him to discuss people's somewhat different behaviour in their cars.
Absolutely true, and I think we've got to really try and educate ourselves to think just because we've shut the door and put the seatbelt on and we're listening to John Campbell on the radio, it doesn't mean we shouldn't still take care of our emotions and really try and keep things in perspective, I think is the way we've got to do it. I use the supermarket analogy. If we get cut up in the supermarket or somebody pulls in front of us in the queue, we don't really react the same, do we? And why is that?
No, and if we did, we would be considered highly irrational, right?
Exactly, and the interesting point here is why we tend to let ourselves become more emotional, more irrational when we're on the road. And it's a real interesting subject, I think, that most people can relate to.
So we were discussing in our office that we were going to talk to you, and I said my bugbear is people who sit in the passing lane when they're not passing, right?
Yep, that's a classic.
So it just drives me nuts.
And that's, we do regular surveys of our members, and that's in the top 10. They're sitting in the passing lane and not returning to the left and letting faster moving traffic go by. And that's a double-edged sword. I mean, that's a safety issue, but it's also an etiquette and just being plain rude, really.
But then I felt my own blood boiling, and I think, sometimes you start to tailgate people and get really exasperated and
yeah,
and
it happens. So we've got to be the bigger man here. You've got to say we all make mistakes, okay, and not everybody's perfect. And I think in most of the walks of life we're much more considerate, much more flexible.
That's true, isn't it?
It is true, and I think we've just got to try and take a little bit of that into our driving styles, and also realise that if we're getting angry, if we're getting upset, it's a distraction. And we all know that distraction and fatigue are the two biggest causes of accidents. And so that's a real one to take, to think about, especially if you've got kids in the car, family in the car,
Yeah, exactly. Actually, you don't want to behave like a goofball in front of your kids, do you? Right?
Well, it's setting good standards for the kids as well. I mean, obviously the kids, even young kids, pick up the habits from their parents or from whoever's driving. And if they see Dad acting like a loony and the only time he does that is in the car, they're going to think that's normal behaviour and follow suit, aren't they?
Yeah. So what sort of case studies have you got? And actually, I'm making a bit light of this, but actually, sometimes road rage can be terrifying.
Oh, there's been some horrific stories
Absolutely.
in the press quite recently, and those are extreme, and I don't think many people would have had those extreme. But I think a lot of us will have. I'm a cyclist, and I put hand on heart, I've been a bit of road rage from now and then if somebody's, not given me enough room. But I think there's different ways of approaching it. We survey our members, and most of the top 10 items that come up that upset our members are really courtesy ones. It's tailgating, it's not indicating, it's slow driving in the outside lane, it's running red lights. Now, some of those are real safety issues, but they're also not respecting other road users and really acting as if you own the road and, why should you give way to anybody?
Yeah, there's a sense of entitlement behind a lot of this, isn't there?
I think so, yeah, and you've got to ask where that's coming from. I mean, everybody, and even cyclists that don't, get accused of using the road free of charge, even though most cyclists pay ACC and road tax on their other vehicles, but that's a separate issue. But I mean, everybody has a right to be on the road. Everybody has a right to walk on the pavement and be safe. Pedestrians, cyclists, all road users, and I think we've got to take a more egalitarian view to that.
Sometimes I live in a part of Auckland where you have to get onto the motorway and you merge so people come into the on-ramp from left and right.
Yep.
And it would be very easy if you merged like a zip, and that's what we're told to do. But sometimes people just try and, jam in, and so that you get 3 cars coming in from the right before one comes in from the left. And you think, this is just nutty crap, because we're only going to stationary traffic anyway. I mean, why would you try and cut someone off when you're entering an Auckland motorway where you're not going to move for the next 20 minutes? I mean, but some of this is... And look, because I do a demographic study, it's men, isn't it, that do, and it's actually men of my age who seem to me to be disproportionately likely to do this crap.
I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know whether it's because we've been emasculated in a lot of other ways, and this is the one way we can get a little win in our day. Or
that's feeble, isn't it? That's really feeble.
But I mean, if that's the biggest win of your day, you've got to think you need to look at the bigger picture. You know?
Exactly.
And most of the time, not merging like a zip or being slightly more aggressive actually makes the whole system slow down, because there's a ripple effect, because you've stopped the traffic, or you've slowed things down, or you've upset somebody, and all that does is slow everything down behind you. So you know,
okay. So how do we police this? How do we kind of formalise a greater decency, consideration, empathy, and kindness on our roads?
It's a tough one. I mean, the road code is quite quiet on this subject. So the road code is very much about the do's and don'ts, but doesn't really look too deeply at the etiquette and the manners side of things. So I think we just need to have more of a debate about it. And also, don't be afraid to question somebody. If you're in a car and somebody in the driver, your friend or your colleague or your family member is acting like this, you've got to question them and say, what are you doing? You know, why are you doing this? And is this a good example? And all you're doing is getting your blood pressure up, and it's not going to get us there any quicker.
The AA's Roger Venn ending Checkpoint for this week. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back Tuesday night at 5 o'clock. Have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. US state governors are forming a coalition to uphold the Paris climate change agreement after Donald Trump announced he's pulling out. The death toll in the Manila casino attack has risen to 36, and locals will join police in the hunt for a Christchurch man. Our next news and weather is at 7. This is trending now. Just before 7:15, Focus on Politics is along. But first, this from Monday's Checkpoint. Here's John Campbell.
Last week we covered the Christchurch Cathedral and we asked for feedback. It came in huge numbers. It was passionate, heartfelt and polarised. As the months and years tick by, the damaged cathedral sits there awaiting its own future. Unless the government intervenes, which is possible but highly unlikely, the decision will be made by Canterbury's Anglican Synod in September, although it's not that simple. It's a Category 1 heritage building and any demolition decision will certainly be fought. At the public centre of all of this is Bishop Victoria Matthews and a restoration bill somewhere in the region of $100 million. The church has $42 million from insurers. The government will give and lend at a total of about $25 million, and much of the rest will have to be raised. But there are people confident that can be done, and the Cathedral Working Group report recommended restoration on that basis. So if the money can be raised, does Bishop Victoria Matthews support the restoration?
I think there are two things. One is it a good decision financially? The other is it a moral decision to go out at this time in the history of Christchurch's pain and slow reinstatement as a city, where there's still many people on the east side suffering in compromised housing? Is that the best way to go to the city and say, please give your money so we can reinstate a building? So I think that's more important, to be honest, than the financial. If there was no risk, I think a lot of people would say, if there's no risk, let's go for reinstatement. But I would hope that people would also ask the question, is that the best way to spend $55 million? And I think that's a real question. Is the best way to spend
Can you answer that for me? And I'm sorry to... Okay, right, so there's $100 million is the cost. Now, you've just raised that then, and you raised this in the press. You wrote a little opinion piece for the press, and you said in it, a question I ask is whether the hurting city of Christchurch will be better helped by fixing this broken building, or by attending to the pain of the people who are still suffering. In other words, are you saying it is not moral to spend this much money on restoring the cathedral?